Oh, hello, friends. Welcome. It is week 4, lecture 3. Sometimes I do this just to remind myself this time is flying by. So we are in week 4, lecture 3, which means that after today's lecture, we are officially done with half of this program, which is kind of wild. Also, I apologize if I sound kind of congested. The pollen is killing me today here in Washington. My allergies, I woke up and I was like, oof, punched in the face by them. So if I sound congested or nasally, then my apologies there. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. As always, we got discussion questions due Sunday. After this week, I will open up weeks 5 through 8. So I can't open those until like Friday afternoon. But after that, weeks 5 through 8 should be open. So, do with that information what you will. You got some core assignments. We've got Axios Pokemon API. You got routing practice and Faker API. Those are your 3 core assignments due this week. Just a reminder, next Monday is a official check-in. So if you are below 60%, you're going to get a probation, an academic probation. You can only get 3 of those for your entirety of your studies. For the entirety of your studies. So please make sure that you at least get up to 60%. We will have had 10 assignments. So if you haven't turned in 6 or more, then you are going to get a probation. So please make sure you go do those. Most of you guys were here, but this past hour, Gray did a Gray's hour. She went through to-do lists, which is, again, always our hardest assignment of the entire cohort. So Gray went through that. It was awesome. I was sitting here just kind of being a fly on the wall. Loved seeing all of your guys' questions and everything in chat. So just as a reminder, Gray's office hour recordings, if Gray is ever recording, it just comes right here to this playlist. And it will be put here. So we had yesterday's office hours right there. And then Gray's hour will come right here as well. And again, that's just at the top of Gray's hour recordings. Cool. Okay, I have to do this. I wish I didn't, but I have to give at least 5 minutes of time for you guys to fill out this survey. If you've already filled it out, I'm really, really grateful. Just as a reminder, this is our mid-stack survey. What this does is it allows Paul, Justina, and I, or Gray, sorry, and I to know kind of what we're doing well, what we could improve upon, how this course is going. So this is a really important one for us just to know how we're doing and how we can serve you guys better. So I do have to do that, unfortunately. So I'm going to give the next 5 minutes. I will stop the recording and we will and I will give you guys that. So that way you can have time to fill it out. I'm going to pause the recording now. Okay, we are back from our survey taking. So we've time traveled a little bit. And now we are just going to move forward and talk about, we have a couple things. We're going to do a recap of yesterday, walk through that just for a second. And then today's class, we're going to talk about the back end. We're just going to open up the back end, see what it does, see kind of some of the reasonings to why we have a backend, reasonings to what Express is, what's the difference between a framework and a library. We're going to start setting that up. We're going to run it. There's another package that we'll download as well. That's going to be called NodeMon, but I'm going to show you another way too that's sort of newer that you don't have to download NodeMon if you are like not wanting to. Then you don't have to do that. So I'll show you all of that. And then we'll finish up with some HTTP verbs. And then we will move forward with that, which would be awesome. And then what we'll do next week is we're going to talk about Mongo, obviously, but then we're also going to talk about some Express plus Mongo. We're going to do some modularization where we've got, and we'll probably modularize here, and then we'll modularize, then go to Mongo, and then really hit Mongo here and here. And then we'll start kind of our backend prep and belt prep as well as we sort of do it all. The reason is because we're going to start out doing everything in one file, similar to kind of what we did with app.js when we were just introducing components and we were just introducing React, and then we're going to break it out like we had separate components in a components folder. Same sort of concept's going to happen. I do just want to warn you, the backend has more steps to set up. In my opinion, it's easier. We'll just work on the flow of data, right? And that's just going to be something that we're going to need to know and must know, but it will be, I promise, At the beginning, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is so many steps. There's so many things I have to do. Yes, that's kind of true. But we will get to a point where it'll be much, much easier. And you'll be like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This makes sense. We'll have this workflow of how we're going to build stuff coming in the future. And that'll be all next week. We're just really going to reiterate that. Before we jump into what is the back end, I did just want to check out what we did yesterday. Because yesterday was a big day. It was our routing day, right? And so what we did is we downloaded a couple things. Anybody remember what we downloaded? What were the different packages? One's like a huge package of
The
everything.
DOM one?
Yeah, which one was it, Randall? Do you remember what it's called? But yeah, last part was DOM.
Route DOM?
Yeah, React Router DOM.
Route DOM.
Yeah, so we used React Router DOM, and that is what's going to allow us to have different routes, right? So if I get this spun up, instead of everything showing within my app.js, I'm able to say, okay, only when my user tries to go here, do I want this to show up, right? If they go to localhost 3000/unicorn, okay, that's when I want unicorn to show up. That's when I want this component to mount all the way through, right? And we talked about how we can have like a nav bar. That nav bar can have kind of links. I was trying to figure out what way to not say link, but links to each one of these pieces, right? So a link is just, you can kind of think about it like an A tag, where basically we just have this link. We have to bring it in from React Router DOM. And then we say, hey, where do you want to go? When this is clicked on, where do I want to send my user? And we don't have to put localhost 3000 here. That's implied. And so here we just say /shaving cream, right? And that went to our shaving cream because I think Tabitha was the one who said, let's do men's shaving cream page. So we did, right? Because we're, it's fun. We also talked about another tool called Use Navigate, right? Where I think we did that on form. Can anybody explain what Navigate does? Or use Navigate, I guess, technically.
Oh, sorry, I was talking the entire time. It allows you to, using Navigate allows you to move between pages based on either submitting a form or clicking on a button or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. You can sort of think about it this way, and I think that this is a good differentiator. Whenever you're wanting just somebody to click on something and there's no functionality going through it, right? There's no like, if you're clicking on something and when it gets to 500, if you had a counter, if it gets to 500, then I want you to send somebody here, just like in our nav bar, right? If I just want to click and go somewhere, we're going to use link. Navigate is going to be great for when I have some sort of action, and after that action is done, then I want to send my user somewhere else. So after I've got some sort of functionality, and a form is really going to be where that shines, right? After I've gotten this form and I've done something with my data, I've talked to my database, then I say, once all of that is done, let's send my user somewhere else. That's where Navigate's going to come in. So if it's just a button, somebody's clicking on to just load another page and there's no functionality, we're going to use link. If there is functionality, like we want to take in the data and we want to do something else, right? Or I need to count and then check the count. And if the count is high, then I navigate all that stuff. Then that's when Navigate's going to really come in handy.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm hungry though.
I'm sorry? Gray or Paul, if you guys can handle, thank you. The last thing we talked about was use params, right? And this was when I've got a route that's got some sort of parameter in here, right? Some sort of, anybody remember what this does? It's like what this allows. Kind of said it a couple of times. I guess, or explain it. It's like a keyword, but.
Allows us to type any number we want.
Yeah, it allows us to be dynamic, right? So no matter, we're just saying, hey, route, we're expecting you, or we're expecting some value to come here. I don't know what that is, but I'm expecting some value. Cool. Now, one thing I do want to note is I think if we were to have something like we had a route path. I'm gonna check something. That said hello. And then it said, it's me, you know, cause like Adele or whatever. If I were to have this above it, because remember it starts from top to bottom, right? And it reads and checks, hey, is this it? Is this it? When it gets here, it's going to say hello. And then it doesn't differentiate. Oh, we've got an it's me. So what it's going to do is it's going to take this, right? And it's just going to apply it's me to this number piece. And so we want to make sure when we have these dynamic ones that they are, you know, if we have any unique or static, if you will, it's like, oh, this is a specific page, then we put those above, or else our browser or else our application is going to interpret whatever this value is this, right? If I put it's me, it's going to say, oh, it matches hello, and then some value, it just happened to be it's me, but it doesn't know that, right? And it just says, okay, number, great, and it will do whatever we say, and then it's going to take this as the value of number. So just be aware of that. If you've got two of them like this, make sure you put the dynamic one, the one that can take in, it's kind of like your catch-all, right? Put that under all of your actual hard-coded ones. Cool. Does that make sense? Any questions on that?
I did have a really quick question. It's not really necessarily about that. That made sense. But in the video, it was showing that you could put the browser router outside of the div bar. Does that cause any extra issues inside?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions on routing? Anything that you guys need to know routing wise? Okay. Easy
Uh,
peasy.
Oh, I
Pleasure.
just,
Go ahead.
Sorry, I have one question. Can you go to the form?
My form?
Yeah.
Of course.
So how many navigate that we can set up for the bottom? For example, if you know, so you said so the navigate with the lowercase can be anything, right?
Mhm. Like this?
So yeah, can we just act for example, if you have 2 or 3 forms in one file JSX, can we actually use or create 3 different navigate for them?
So you don't need to. Navigate's just going to instantiate this. And so let's say you had multiple like on submits, you can
Yeah.
still just use navigate and just change wherever you're going. All that
Ah,
would have to change would be this guy right here.
okay, so for example, navigate 1. So how? Okay, so imagine if I have a 3 different on submit. Oh, okay, yeah. Got you.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
right.
So let's say you had this. Like, let's say we had a second one. This is send survey 2. Let's just say that, right? And this wanted to go to unicorn because this was a second form.
You're right. Mhm.
Then you would just say navigate unicorn.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So this works for all of them. It's just this functionality here.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
hey, well, I just wanted to, for the routing part, I know I was debugging with a student when it came to like using browser router.
Mhm.
If I'm not mistaken, if you have a div on the outside of browser router, it won't find the routes. I don't know why, but I didn't look it up, but I know that was a solution for our student. So if it does not, I have to look at the student's code, but it was, it couldn't find it. And then when we removed the div, it found it. I can't remember if it was on the inside of browser router or on the outside, but that was one of the issues that I have with the student, so. that's what I
Okay.
meant about it.
Yeah, if you want to send that to me, I'm not sure because it should work just a-okay.
Yeah, let me double check. It was in the cohort. I don't know if he had it on the inside of browser router or the outside, but
Yeah.
yeah,
'cause
how the
that's what
platform has
works.
it. Oh, okay, how the platform has it, I think it was probably on the inside of browser router. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I think it works both ways because in theory, if you have an inside browser router, but we did it here, right? That div, this is just a div. And so this would just be going inside a browser router either way, right?
Yeah, like inside like after, like if the browser router was outside of the div, like, so if there was a div inside there,
I
but
guess.
yeah, for some reason for that student, it didn't,
Hmm.
it couldn't find the routes. So I don't know
If
if
it
that's,
was like this, then I think I did see something like this in Discord. If
yeah,
this is not enclosed within browser router, then yes, that'll be the issue.
okay.
So, but it should, I mean, and it should, from all my understanding, it should be a-okay here.
Yeah, that's fine. I just couldn't remember if it was inside or outside, but if those who are playing with routes, make sure that
Yeah.
you don't have that, yeah.
Yeah, and let me know if I could be incorrect, right? And so, if you guys do test it and that is on the inside and that doesn't work, just let me know.
Mine worked for me. That's why I asked the question, is because
Mhm.
the video that we have on the platform, actually the guy shows you having browser router outside of div, and that's how I was following like the setup. But then I'm like, I looked back at your video and I was like, maybe I should have it inside. But either way, it was functioning perfectly fine for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be,
Yeah, just check. Oh, sorry.
oh yeah, I was
I
just
guess-
say, there's lots of ways, right? I showed in the first class, you actually could put browser router here. Right? So there's lots of ways to do it. Kind of depending on what, did you have something, Gray?
Yeah, just check. So like, so it was browser router, and inside browser router was like the div app. And it didn't work for that student. And then once we moved app outside, because I think the platform has it outside of the browser router. So we weren't able to connect it. So that could be a solution. I don't know if that was
Sure.
like the reason why, but just putting it out there just in case anyone has that issue to maybe not have a div inside.
Yeah,
yeah.
test it out, and who knows, because it sounds like Tabitha did that, where Tabitha, you had the div on the inside of browser router and it worked okay. So sometimes things are finicky and weird and you just got to stop your server and start again, and then it'll automatically work. You don't change your code. So great
Yeah.
call out, Gray. Just in case that happens, try it in and out, and then if that's the case, let us know and we can try to figure out why the heck that was happening. Cool, great call out. Any other questions on routing? Okay, great. Great. So I want to move forward, and we are officially not talking about the front end for a while. Now, don't just throw out everything, because we're going to end up using that here in 2 weeks, week 6. But now moving forward, we're just going to be talking about the back end and kind of how the back end works. And we're going to be starting to build our back end and start integrating a database. So I want to just first talk about, well, what is a backend? We talked about it, I think, the first class. And so I thought, let's go ahead and talk about it real quick, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then once we have sort of this visual understanding, then we can kind of move forward and have this idea of what our code's doing, because now we're going to start connecting multiple things together, right? And so as we start connecting, we need to have a pretty good understanding of how data is flowing, what is going on, what is, what's kind of, how is this working? So let's go ahead and talk about that. Cool. So right here on my left, we're just going to call this my front end. So front end. And this is going to be React. Like this is just going to be React, right? So I'm just going to put React. But we know that there's more to it. There's all of our tools within React. We have HTML, all of that stuff. We're just going to call it React. Then we're going to have our backend. And this is going to be Node. And then we're going to finally have our database, which is going to be MongoDB. Perfect. Great. Now, we are used to, because we have now worked with React, we're used to making API calls, right? And we're saying, okay, I want to go to Pokey and I want to get something. I'm making a request to the Pokey or API or to the Star Wars API. And then that request is doing something, or sorry, that backend, that endpoint is what it's called whenever you have a, when it was like swappy API /people, that's the endpoint. So if ever, whenever I was in a coding boot camp. Someone's like, oh, what's the endpoint? I had no idea. It's just, hey, what is the route or the browser route that's going to get me there, right? Whenever I'm pinging this API, what is the kind of the map or what I'm supposed to do? That's called an endpoint, right? And so we made this call to some sort of server, some sort of backend. Well, we're we are doing the exact same thing. We are making a call. We're making what we call our request, right, to our backend. Our backend is going to handle that request. And it is going to, let me type in request here. Right. And then if it needs to, if it says, oh yeah, this request, I need to go hit my database, then it will take that request to the database, grab that piece of information. And then that's what we call our database will then take in that request and give a response, right? Our backend will handle that and package it in the way that we need it. So it might not just take the response kind of natively, like once MongoDB gives it, it's like, oh, here it is. It might package, it might plate up the response, right? It might make it in a certain process that the API says, oh, this is how I'm going to give it back. Here's all my keys. Here's everything. I'm going to make sure it is all nice and pretty for my user. And then it gives it back, right? So it does all the functionality and gives back what we call a response. And then we handle it. And then we've seen many, many times how we handle it with the Pokey API, with the Star Wars API. And so this is how the full stack application works. Now, Node is going to be our backend, and Node is a JavaScript backend. It's JavaScript, right? And right now we've got this blank canvas. We can do anything. It's the Wild West, right? There are no rules. Anything can happen. What we now, which is fine, and there's lots of things, but what if we're like building, I don't know if you think about, I never played Roller Coaster Tycoon, but I'm assuming you can start from blank, or you could start with like a template, right? And it basically is like, oh, you're going to have this template, you have these roller coasters here, and you have this Ferris wheel here, et cetera, et cetera. And what it did is it basically kind of laid out a framework of how your theme park was going to run. Right? You have a roller coaster here, you have this, and you could alter some things, but it had a framework, a blueprint of what that does. For us, we are going to use something called Express. Let me try to make sure. I'm going to make this blue. Let's see. So think of this light blue as Node, and then we're going to take and make Express and lay it on top. Now, obviously, it's going to like fill the whole thing. So it's not like, oh, what is that gap? But I just want you to be able to see that that is it. And this blue is going to be Express. And Express is going to be our framework that dictates how our backend operates, how we take in requests, how it makes requests to MongoDB, how it handles those requests. It's a lot of the heavy work that we don't have to do now because we're using a framework to model what are we supposed to do? How are we operating? Now, I've always heard, or there's oftentimes questions of what is the difference between a framework versus a library? The main difference, right? And sometimes they're used interchangeably, so don't get too caught up on this, but really from like an actual standpoint, a library is just a bunch of tools that you can use, right? It's a bunch of different things, different methods, different ways to handle things. That is what we call a library, right? It's just basically this grab bag, and you can go in and say, I want to use this, I want to use this, I want to use this, I want to use this. Great, cool, works great. A framework, on the other hand, actually dictates how you do things, right? And it might say, hey, this framework doesn't support certain things. And so it really kind of dictates more of how you operate in your code, right? It's got a little bit more of a like guardrails to say, no, you cannot do X, Y, or Z. And it really kind of can be great because it allows our code to be fast and to be efficient. On the other end, it can bog us down a little bit, right? It can say like, well, I wanted some of this flexibility and you don't have that. So that's where difference between sort of a framework and a library. In the front end, you can sort of think about React as your library, and Angular. There's one called Angular, which is more of a framework. It's pretty heavy. You have to do things a certain way. Same thing, right? But Express frameworks aren't bad. I'm kind of saying, kind of painting frameworks in a bad light, but it's not. You will see it does all of the heavy lifting for us when we're talking about if you guys are coming from Java or you're coming from Python and you have all of these validations you have to do. Oh, by using a framework, it is much, 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 much easier for that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is, okay, let's start using Express. There's certain things we have to do in order to use this framework to kind of apply this to our backend. So we're going to work and talk about that. And then we will start taking in requests. We're going to sort of spin this up and we're going to use Postman, which is a tool that we talked about 2 weeks ago or last week, I think, to actually start testing our backend server, right? So you might also hear this thing being called a server. We don't have a database yet, but we're going to have a server that can do certain things that when we make a request, it will give us a response. So that is what we will be doing today for the rest of the time. Are there any questions on this? On this request response cycle, on anything else? Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete this. And then let's get started. So if we look on the platform, we are now in the Express section, right? Where it's going to talk about an API. And again, that's kind of what we're building. That is what we're building. It's not kind of what we're building. We're building an API, right? We're going to have a tool that people can request and get some endpoint requests at some endpoint. And then it's going to have some functionality to say, when this is requested at this endpoint, this is what we give them, right? So we're starting to build that for ourselves, which is going to be great. Later on, we're going to introduce this idea of middleware to kind of handle certain things, but we don't need to focus on that right now. We are just going to build our backend. Again, like I said, we need to have Postman. So if you haven't already downloaded it, go ahead and download it now while I'm kind of talking and getting there, because we want to make sure that everything is taken care of. Cool. Now, before I get started with the backend, I've mentioned this a few times. I want to talk about some HTTP verbs. Now, when we make a request to our backend or we're setting up our backend, we talked about that there's a couple different ways that people can make requests, right? We've really just done a GET request of saying, hey, I'd like to retrieve some information. Now, if we have a form, and really you can sort of think about a form is going to be the most popular time. But if we want to give some information, some sensitive information, you can think about if you're signing up for Facebook or you're signing up for anything and we're sending some information, that's going to be what we call a post request. So if you're getting some information, hey, can you go retrieve in the database? I just want to see all of my friends. Then you are getting some information. If you're giving any information to an endpoint, it's going to be a post request. Now, if you guys have taken Java or Python, you are familiar with get and post. If you've not, that's okay. I just know that post is I'm giving you information. Get is I am getting information. Now, within this, and this is HTTP verbs are not unique to different languages, but the way that they sort of operate can be different. So in the way that Node works might be a little bit different. But all of these are HTTP verbs that are going to be persistent through most languages. The other one is put. Now put, you can think of put and patch as our editing. So if I'm going to edit, let's say I create a user and then I misspell, I find out, oh, I misspelled my name. Well, then we can go in and we can edit that information by using a put or a patch. Now, the big difference between each is, let's say that I want to just edit one piece of information. I misspelled my first name. So I want to go in and I don't want to have to send all of this new information back, right? Then I can use a patch that is updating pieces of sensitive information. If I use a put, that means that anytime I'm giving that information back or I'm updating, let's say I have a user that has 10 different fields, I've got to, upon that request, I also have to give the other 9 fields, right? I have to give all 10 fields in order for me to use a put. And for patch, I just have to give that one field that I specify and say, this is the only thing I'm updating. And it says, okay, great, that's fine. You might ask why we would ever use put or patch. Just depends on kind of what you're doing. I usually lean towards patch because it seems, kind of seems silly to do all of the information all the time, but it is kind of personal preference at some point. Just know that there's a little bit more work or you have to have more information. And based on how your platform or how, kind of what data you have access to will be dependent on which one you do. And then the last one is delete, right? And I think that sounds pretty straightforward. This is used for deleting sensitive information. Christian just said something that is dead on. This is our CRUD. So create, oops, let me go back. I was wrong. We're going to create with post. If you've never heard of CRUD is just a common thing that within development, it's just kind of an acronym for creating, reading, updating, and deleting. And that's kind of the framework, the bones of any sort of application. Can you create something? Can you read something? Can you update it? And can you delete it? And transparently, the only thing I'm going to look for in the exam are those. There's a couple different things, but really, can you create something? Can you read it? Can you read all of them? Can you read one of them? So different variations of each. Can you update something and can you delete it? And if you can do that, then you are good to go. So our post is our create, right? We're giving some information. Post, you might ask yourself, well, why, if I'm passing all of my information between put and post, right? What is the difference here? Why are these, it kind of seems like they're the same thing. Post is when you are creating something new. So if you have all this information and you're creating something new, that's what post is going to be. And put is going to be, again, if you already have something in the, like if you already have something in your database and you're just wanting to update it, that's where put. So they kind of look the same, but post is for anything new when you're creating something. CRUD, or the R, is read, because I'm getting something. I want to go get some information. I want to read it. Put and patch are my U. And delete is my D. So record is a better way, but yeah, it's CRUD, right? Creating, reading, updating, and deleting. Cool. Any questions on HTTP methods? Sometimes they're known as verbs. Any questions on that? We're going to get lots of practice with all of them. And this kind of talks more in depth about getting, posting, put, patch, delete, and different things as well. Cool. Well, now I want to talk about how we actually use this, right? So we're going to kind of follow this. There's one thing we've got to do is this, and this is always so confusing for students, so I don't love it. But you can download the boilerplate code right there. All that's going to give you is this guy. This is all it's going to give you. So we're going to build off of this. But really what it's trying to do is you have to run npm i. All you're doing is installing Express. So let's go there. Let's go into our actual project. Okay, let me make this bigger for you. Now, right now, I don't have anything in here. I just have a class overview. What you're going to end up doing and what we're going to move towards is having a server folder that we create. So I'm going to encourage you to get used to doing that. So I'm going to say mkdir server ls. Now I've got a folder called server, and then I'm going to cd into server. Okay. Now, that's great. If I just download this and I run npm I, remember it's my package JSON, it just goes and says, oh, I need Express. Let's download that. Well, right now, you're not always gonna have this code, right? And you definitely don't want to go in and download this every single time. So instead, what we will do is we can go to our code right here. I'm in this. And within my server, I'm going to say npm init -y. And what this is going to do is this is going to create this exact same thing right here, but within my server folder. So now I've got a package JSON, right? So now I've got a package JSON. So if I say npm install express, cool, good to go. I come back, I now see express and I have access. And one thing to note is you also have your node modules here. Also, we're going to have your node modules. So if node modules is already going to happen, what does that mean you should do ahead of time? Think all the way back. Yep, get a init. Absolutely. You don't necessarily, Alex, have to upload it to GitHub. You just got to initialize first. So right now I'm okay because I've got a, my parent already has it, but if I didn't, then this is going to initialize a Git file. It's not going to happen. But if I were to say like ls-a, we would see a .git file. So make sure, because we created a package JSON, so it'll create a Git file. So make sure that before you do that, you initialize. If you want this as an individual GitHub thing and you don't have a parent, then make sure you initialize first. But now I've got my node modules. If I've got node modules, what's another file I need to have?
Git ignore.
Git ignore. Absolutely. Git ignore. So I'm going to say git ignore, and then I'm going to ignore node modules. Okay. So yes, you will have two git ignores because you're going to have two separate sets of node modules. Now, this is my server, right? This is going to be my backend. We will eventually, and I'll just show you, just to show you kind of how the setup's going to be, is I'm going to have something like this. Somebody said rip computer storage. Yeah, that's funny.
Will, is that okay to just show one more time how you install the Express?
Absolutely, yeah. So now we're going to have a client and a server, right? This is our full stack. This is how it's going to happen. Ignore this class overview. You're not going to have that. So you are going to have these here. So this is how it's going to be. You've already created a million clients, so you know how that works. But we can do, whenever we have our server, this is kind of what the structure is going to look like. We're going to have some different things in here, but this is how it works. Going back, what we're going to do is we are going to create our server folder, right? So let's just start here. Let's look at the bottom. So we're creating our server folder and we're going to ls into that, right? Once we go in there, or sorry, we ls into our lecture 3, we see that we have a server folder and we cd into it. Then before we run this npm init -y, we want to make sure we initialize our actual, lecture 3, if that's what we choose to do. Then we are going to have our CD, we're going to CD into our server, run this npm init -y. When we do that, it creates this package JSON file for me. Now, since it's done that, I can go in and I can do npm install express. Since it's done that, I can run npm install express. And then once that happens, now it just operates just like normal, right? We just had to instantiate and create this package JSON file. Then what we did is do npm install express. And what I see in chat, Nandor, yeah, you could have a server node modules, client node modules. I just say you could just have two because this is already created for you. So, but yeah, you in theory could just have a get ignore out here and then do that. Yeah. I just figure if you're going to create one, one's already created for you, but yeah, absolutely. Nando was just asking about, do we have to have two get ignores or can we have one? You can't have one, but you're going to create one anyway. So I just figured instead of going in, deleting and doing all that as well. Okay, great. Now within this server folder, we're going to have a file called server.js. Cool. We have this server.js. It's not JSX, right? We are no longer working in the front end. We're no longer working with Babel and React. It's just JS from here on out. Because again, our backend is Node, which is JavaScript, right? Okay. So now that we have this, we have to do a couple things. I first have to instantiate my backend. So I have to say const express equals require express. Right? This is me saying, hey, I'm using express as my backend. Then if we're looking here, I say, okay, let's go ahead and use that. We're going to create this app. And let's run express. So let's actually use this. And this is just our backend setup. And then lastly, we're going to say, hey, this is the port I want to go on. Now, this is optional. It's a great thing to have, and the actual port itself, if you've got something that's already running on 8,000, you can change this. It's kind of up to you. You can do that. That is a-okay. So we've brought in some requirements, and this is a page that we are going to build some stuff in today, but we're going to modularize it out. So that way, not everything's just in one file. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we need to handle, remember, this is a backend framework. This is our API that needs to handle a request and give a response, right? So it takes in the request and gives a response. So what we do is we do this guy right here is we say app, because this is app right here, right? We take that guy and we say app.get. Now, in this case, it's /API. Now, we're no longer in localhost 3000. We're in localhost 8000, right? So localhost 8000 /API is taking in a request and it's going to give a response. So if I wanted to do something, we're going to end up doing something with our request. So again, if I'm creating something, then I can, take that request and go to my database and make that. Right now, I don't need to. We're just kind of doing whatever. And I'm saying, cool. Now, once this happens, I've taken this request. This is what I want to respond with. And this rec res can be anything, right? These are just kind of, could be unicorn cupcake. Just need to handle that. Obviously, you want to have good verbiage because you want other people to understand your code. So we say rec res. So stick with this. Just know that these are kind of just parameters. And we're saying, great. Whenever this happens, whenever somebody does a GET request to /API, I want to respond. And remember the format that APIs can give back a couple different formats, but the main one is a JSON format, right? So we're saying, cool, let's go ahead and respond with this object right here, this JSON object of message hello world. So when this gets up and running, we are handling, okay, whenever you get a request to localhost 8000 /API, I want you to respond with a JSON object that says message hello world. And then lastly, what we want to do is we want to, at the very bottom, say, okay, now I want you to listen for requests to this port. So when a request is made to this port, and again, it could have just say 8,000 right here, and you don't have to have port. So this is interchangeable because we called it port up here. This is port. If we call this unicorn, it could be unicorn. And saying, great, I want you to listen and then console log this guy. And this is just a tool. You don't need to touch this, just to let us know, hey, our server's up and running. Okay. Now I can say node. Now, if same way that I say npm start, the way I start my server is just saying node server.js. So I'm going to come into here. I'm going to say, I'm going to clear this. I'm going to say node server.js. There's an issue. Cannot find. Oops. Because I need to cd into server. I need to cd into the file or the folder that has it, right? There's server.js. Now I say node server.js. We get this listening on port 8,000. Just right here. So now if I were to go to localhost host 8,000 / API, localhost 800. I get this response back. I've made a request and this is my response. Message, hello world. Okay. You've got 7 minutes left. So field me with your questions. This is kind of all I needed to go over today. We're just setting it up. We're going to modularize this. But any questions on what we just talked about? Oops. That's what I wanted to go to.
So will we be connecting our front end in that listen command?
We will not be. We're going to have some middleware. We're going to use this tool called Cores. And that is what allows each server. So allows for a request from server 3,000 over to 8,000. So we will be using it within our server.js file. That's where we're going to put all the functionality for that to allow it to listen. But we are going to get this stuff out of here. It'll just be kind of like here's our information and instruction page. Now, the platform talks about installing NodeMon, which you absolutely can do. Where NodeMon is a tool right now, if since I just said node server.js, it says listening on port 8,000. This is just listening. If I said hello world this, right, and I save it, but I come back here and I refresh, you see that it doesn't update with my new code. So what you can do is you can say, there's two options. You can say NodeMon server.js. Cool. And it still says listening on port 8,000. So now when I request, that's great. It's got the exclamation point. If I add in another one, you can come in and refresh and now it changes, right? So as I'm testing, it's constantly kind of updating my server.
So
The
that
other
was,
way that you can do it, and this is sort of new, is to say node -- watch server.js. And it does the exact same thing. It is experimental. It's from 18, but it'll do the exact same thing. So if you don't want to download anything, so like if we come here, we refresh. I come here, save, fresh. Now it changes. So they both do the same thing. So if you didn't want to download something, then you could just do node, oops, node -- watch. It doesn't show up as that. I don't know why it just skips the -- watch thing, but oh, this is, yeah. It's kind of weird. Got rid of some of the stuff. Okay.
so if we don't want to install NodeMon, I'm assuming that's what you were saying. Then we can do node dash dash watch. And
Node
that allows us,
dash dash watch. Spell it correctly. Yep, and then your file name does the same exact thing. Yeah, so you didn't want to install NodeMon. Now with this NodeMon, this is not, you don't need to install it every time. Like if you follow this, just fine, you can do it. And again, this is, node dash dash watch is an experimental mode. It's newer. So if there is an issue, right, if you're really struggling, you're like, my code is right, it might be worth it to download NodeMon just to check it. And it's not a huge thing to like where your computer's going to break or whatever. But if you notice this -G, that means it's global, meaning that you only have to do this one time. And then now anytime you say NodeMon, it's going to know it. So you don't have to do it each package. You don't have to download NodeMon. If you didn't have this G here, you would, right? But because you have this G, it's global. So now for the rest of the time, if you say NodeMon, it's going to know what you're talking about.
So when we look at the message is basically the key. Like when we were at the Pokemon API, it would be name.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
we can make this anything. We're just saying we want to respond with this. So if I said, age 30, I just made that up. Then if I come here and I refresh, it's just the response. Yeah, and just like that, Philip, we could then handle that, right? We take that response on our front end and say, cool, I want to put in state, name, and age, and then I can do something with it and show a profile or something like that. Same exact thing. Exactly. This is just the response that we're getting back. Any other questions, friends?
Why doesn't it update automatically? It needs NodeMon.
Yeah, so yeah, it needs NodeMon. I don't know why Node doesn't. But it needs NodeMon if you wanted to, like if you do something and save it, the next time you make a request, it'll sort of restart your server. And Python, it did the same thing too. I think you had to have a package or something. I don't know why it natively doesn't do it, but now if you just add -- watch, then that's telling Node, cool, I want you to, anytime there's a new thing happening, just go ahead and refresh and spin that up. So that's why you have to do the -- watch. But if you just do Node, it's not going to do it. It's just going to, whatever was the last saved whenever you ran it. So even if you did a whole bunch of stuff, then you refreshed, it's not going to show anything. So that's where the -- watch and or NodeMon comes in.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Great question. Anything else? Any other questions, friends? Cool. So just as a recap, today we created a folder. We talked about HTTP verbs, right? We aren't talking about folder structure yet. I got a little bit ahead of myself because that's modularization, which we'll do on Tuesday. Really start setting that up. We had backend setup, backend introduction. We talked about HTTP verbs. Now, one thing I do just want to point out is right now we just have one route, but I could have something else, right? I could have an app.get of API / human or dog. And then it just respond with my dog's name, Charlie, and he is 5, right? And so I save this. This is running. So if I say API /dog, I get a different response, right? And so again, this is how the backend works with Pokemon. You had all these different endpoints you could do. It's just all we're doing, right? So we're saying if they go here, here's what I want to give them back. If they go here, here's what I want to give them back. Now we're going to have some functionality where we're going to say, hey, if they go here and they gave us some information, cool. Then I'm going to ping my database and I'm going to do some stuff. And then I'm going to give them a response back. So we have some functionality that we can do, but just for right now, just to get our feet wet, we're just handling this response. Now, the idea is that in Postman, you can do the same thing. That we can just say localhost 3000 as long as our server is running, or localhost 8000. I'm so sorry. We just say localhost 8000, whatever, and then it will also get a response. So it's a great tool to practice with. Great. So if I said local host 8000 API, we send it and we get our response of hello world. Right? If I say /Doug, so this is a way we could test it. Because we're oftentimes not going to have, you're not just going to show it on your HTML, right? It's not going to show like that. So Postman's a great way that we can test it, and we can change for testing our post or our put, our patch, or our delete. You can change that here. And it gives me Charlie in 5. Oops. Great. Any other questions? Ravita asked, where do you use the rec parameter? We haven't gotten there yet because we haven't taken anything in with our request. We're going to get there whenever we deal with forms, and we're taking in part of our request. We're going to take in some information, then we'll deal with that. If I had something that I wanted to send to my database, or I wanted to handle or do some sort of functionality with, that's where the rec would come in. Right now, we're just worrying about, can we make a request here? And then let's respond. Great question, though. Okay. Well, that's all I have, friends. I will. Teresa, did you have something?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I thought I heard something, and then in the little window pane, it said something. It said your name. So awesome. That's all I have. And we will talk next week more about modularizing and actually expanding and building upon our API. So other than that, please make sure you guys do your assignments, at least 6 of them. Have a wonderful night, guys. I'll stop the recording here.